This is Hashtag Finance, presented to you by the Canadian Securities Exchange, the exchange for entrepreneurs. With your host, Barrington Miller.
Welcome to another edition of Hashtag Finance. I'm your host, Barrington Miller, and today I am here as part of Cannabis 3.0, talking with high-powered attorney Sahar Ayinehsazian. Did I pronounce it correctly?
That was perfect, yes.
Awesome. And Sahar and I go way back. But thank you for joining us today. How's your family? How's everybody doing?
We're all very fortunate that we haven't had any health effects from COVID-19, so very grateful for that. Obviously in quarantine, much like the rest of the country and largely the rest of the good population of the world is, but if being in quarantine is the worst of it, I'm very grateful for that.
This thing has really hit hard, and we're all in it together. Oddly enough, there's no real discrimination. I mean, some can argue who's being hit more, but overall, there's no real discrimination. It doesn't matter race, color, creed, country, borders, anything like that. But this is part of Cannabis Week, and we will keep the focus pretty much on that. How is business going at Vicente? I always say Sederberg because I know a guy, last name Sederberg, but it's Vicente Sederberg.
Yeah.
Where are you for our audience?
So I am in downtown LA, located actually a couple blocks away from where our office is. Have been here working from home for almost the last 3 months or so.
What's business been like? Have you seen an increase in certain areas, a decrease in others, an increase with the types of companies that are seeking your counsel?
So luckily for us, business has generally been as usual. We have seen an increase in demands for advice and counsel on some things that we hadn't as much before. A lot of that is things like employment law, landlord-tenant issues, and litigation or pre-litigation, as well as businesses coming to us and asking, well, how can we best operate during COVID-19? Because as you know, cannabis in the United States, in really almost every state where there's a legal framework for cannabis, has been recognized as an essential business. So we have a lot of clients coming to us and asking, what are some of the best practices that we can put forth during COVID-19? How do we approach regulators if we need to change some of our basic operating practices for now? So we've seen an increase in that.
For our audience members, Vicente Sederberg is a law firm that happens to deal with cannabis, or is it a cannabis law firm? And that extends to you being a cannabis attorney or an attorney that practices cannabis.
So VS is definitely the latter of what you ask. We are a cannabis law firm. From the very beginning of when we were established, the plan and the goal was and has always been to serve the cannabis industry. And all of our services rotate around everything that the cannabis industry needs, be it licensing, regulatory and compliance, corporate transactions, or banking, which is where my expertise lies. All of that is tailored toward the cannabis industry, and of course, the hemp industry as well, now that the two are more separated a little bit. And for myself, I very much consider myself a cannabis attorney. My practice is centered around cannabis and everything that the industry needs, rather than just being an attorney who happens to serve the cannabis industry.
I started smiling, especially when you mentioned cannabis banking, because that dovetails into how we met, why we're here. I started getting a lot of questions about banking and can we do it, being the cannabis companies and the operators in the United States, and how can we do it? I had a list of about 6 or 7 solutions, and I'm using air quotes, but I didn't feel confident. There were some contradictions. So I went to good old-fashioned Google and I said, who knows about cannabis banking? Who are the top people? And lo and behold, Sahar's name came up. Great speaker, lots of experience. So I reached out to her on LinkedIn and I said, hey, I have this question. I'm from the Canadian Securities Exchange. You probably don't know me, but is this right? Can companies do banking? Is banking illegal in the cannabis sector in the United States? And naturally, she gave an eloquent, detailed reply. And I hopped on it and started asking her a bunch more questions, to which she replied. And then we started talking. And a few months later, we found ourselves in Colombia, which we will get into. But before we get to Cartagena, that's my little accent. It's
It's a
terrible.
very good one.
Can operators do banking in the United States?
So in the United States, cannabis and cannabis related businesses, so tier 1 and tier 2 businesses, as banks would classify them, do now have increasing access to financial institutions for depository purposes, which means that they can take their money, put it into a bank or a credit union, write checks, accept wires and ACHs and whatnot. They still face a lot more difficulties, especially plant touching businesses, than quote unquote normal businesses do. But in the United States, there is now more general access to banking for cannabis and cannabis related businesses.
Now that would fall under the Safe Banking Act?
So the Safe Banking Act seeks to kind of ameliorate or remove a lot of the concerns that financial institutions have traditionally had when it comes to cannabis banking, largely getting their insurance from the FDIC or the NCUA pulled, or having their account with the Fed closed, or really other prosecution from banking authorities. Now, the key there is that even with the passage of the Safe Banking Act, it's important to recognize that banks are not mandated to bank cannabis. And when I say banks, I mean banks and credit unions. So financial institutions are not mandated to bank cannabis. It just seeks to remove some of the issues that they traditionally have had. It still is the individual decision of each financial institution of whether or not they want to bank cannabis or cannabis related businesses, and if they do, what type of cannabis related or cannabis businesses they want to bank. So passage of the Safe Banking Act would be great. It would be a huge milestone, but it still doesn't mean that cannabis banking doors are just going to completely open the day after its passage.
And that's the distinction which a lot of companies seem to overlook. They think once this passes, the banks open their doors, companies, cannabis companies can run in, open accounts and start depositing money and writing checks, and that is clearly not the case.
Well, even with the passage of the Safe Banking Act, financial institutions, financial institutions generally don't like to take risks where they don't have to. They like to really have everything buttoned up. So even with the passage of the Safe Banking Act, financial institutions are still going to have to implement due diligence procedures for onboarding and really ongoing monitoring of cannabis and cannabis related businesses, which in large part will still be built on the 2014 FinCEN guidance. Now, putting those programs together and maintaining them can be timely and can be costly, also depending on how exactly a bank puts those together. So those are still considerations to take into account. And of course, there's also the issue of reputational risks, because cannabis, even though we've made huge strides and really are continuing to become more and more normalized, especially as we continue to become more recognized sectors of state economies, still has a little bit of stigma that largely carries from the war on drugs. And banks, especially larger financial institutions, will be a little bit more wary to take on an industry that may have the reputational stigmas and risks like cannabis does.
When we, for our audience, you can tell why I reached out to Sahar to get some clarity and clarification on cannabis banking. Now, Sahar, your background is a little bit sort of fell into your lap, getting not only into cannabis, but cannabis banking, and of course everything that entails the legal profession around it. Let's talk a little bit about you, and where did you go, and where did you study law, and how did you end up here?
So I went to law school at Loyola Law School, which is also a few blocks away from where I live. It's all kind of come full circle, which is nice. When I was studying at Loyola, I thought that I wanted to litigate business and soft IP. Really took every class I could to make that a possibility. Right out of law school, I started litigating business and soft IP at a larger mid-sized firm in LA, and pretty quickly realized, I guess the dream was very different than the reality, and maybe this isn't what I necessarily want to do. And at that point, I still had no clue that I would end up in cannabis banking or cannabis at all, really. So I left the litigation job that I had gotten without anything really lined up. And I was looking on my law school's job posting website and saw an opening for a company that was doing financial transactions for the cannabis industry. And I thought, well, money's cool. Cannabis is growing. Why not give it a shot? And so I went and I interviewed, and I ended up very, very, very fortunate to get the job. And this was as startup, I think, as you can get. Aside from being in a garage, it had all the trimmings of a startup, which I literally worked on a plastic folding table for the first few months I was there. But being there at the very start of the company was such a gift, really, because it allowed me to understand how cannabis regulations in various states work, how banking works, how the two are married together, how government relations has a role in that, and then also just how a business is built, especially a cannabis business is built, and what its unique and specific needs are, which allows me to better serve my clients. And the timing of it really was perfect too, because I started there in April of 2016, and November of 2016, we saw really this wave of legalization happening in the November 2016 elections. So it was kismet, really.
I'm going to give a shout out to the hiring manager or the talent acquisition team at Vicente, because you've been kind enough to introduce me to your colleagues in Colorado, as well as your colleagues in Florida. One in particular that stands out is Sally Peebles in Florida. I actually ended up running into her or meeting her in Panama. We went out for dinner, and she was talking about like cliff climbing. Because of her, I watched Free Solo, and it's something I will never, ever, ever do. Respect it. I'll watch it. I will go to rock climbing walls. But
Admire from afar.
Oh, for sure. Very, very far. And very on the ground. So a shout out to the hiring staff, because the people at your firm have been incredibly warm, knowledgeable, very, very knowledgeable. And I do believe that the office or branch out of Colorado had a hand in drafting the legislation for all of this to start, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we really take pride in being able to serve the cannabis industry the best that we can, because we recognize that we also have a hand in where the industry goes. So we make sure that all of our attorneys and really all of our staff, to the extent necessary, are as knowledgeable as can be about everything going on in the industry and continue to evolve that knowledge as the industry evolves. And you hit on a very key point. Our founding partners had a large hand in drafting Amendment 64 in Colorado, which led to the legalization of cannabis there, and really has served as a model throughout the rest of the country, anywhere that we see legalization or thoughts of legalization brewing.
Beginning of 2020, I'm sure you had an outlook and a vision as to where the industry was headed. Fast forward a few months, and there is a global pandemic. In some regions, cannabis has been deemed an essential service. Has your outlook changed? Has this expedited things? Where do you see the industry now, today, versus the beginning of 2020?
So that's a great question. And I don't know if my outlook has changed as much as I think it's been expedited. So at the end of 2019, myself and a few colleagues at MJ Biz were discussing, well, what do we see as the future of cannabis in 2020, and where do we see it in 2021? And we really came to a consensus that we expected this year to be a year of consolidation and to be a year where really good operators would be perfecting their operations, tightening things up a lot more, and we would see really the cream rising to the top.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that COVID has just made that happen more quickly, has forced that really to happen a lot more quickly. And so I think at the end of this year and at the beginning of this year, a lot of what we can expect to see is that consolidation. Unfortunately, we're going to see some of the operators going under. Bankruptcy hasn't generally been available to cannabis businesses. So it'll be more of, I think, sales and kind of being taken apart a little bit where that's possible and where that's available. But I think we're going to still see the good operators rising to the top and continuing forward into 2021.
It's interesting that you mentioned bankruptcy. I think we had our first claim from a U.S. operator being in Canada, and because they're listed on a Canadian exchange, they were able to qualify. I could be just jumbling all the rules together, but I know there was the first claim. Let's talk about the very close relationship with hemp. Vicente's had a very strong presence in that space as well, and I'm for our purposes, I'm just keeping them separate, even though they're intertwined intimately.
Yeah.
There was the passage of the Hemp Act in
2018 Farm Bill.
The Farm Bill. What does that mean in layperson's terms? What does it mean?
So, of course, my colleague Sean Hauser, who's one of VS's partners and the chair of our hemp group, would be able to explain this much more eloquently than I can. She has had a huge hand in where the hemp industry is headed, especially post 2018 Farm Bill, but I'll give it a shot.
I've had the pleasure of talking with her and corresponding with her on email, and everything you're saying is true. She's dynamite.
She is just excellent. Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have learned a lot of what I've learned about hemp from her. So shout out to Sean.
Hey, Sean, if you're watching or listening.
So what the 2018 Farm Bill did is it really took hemp, which we consider being the cannabis sativa plant with 0.3% or less THC, separated that from the definition of cannabis, and so it really is no longer seen as a federally illegal substance. Now, the catch there is that every state with a hemp program pursuant to the 2018 Farm Bill has to have its hemp program approved, and that largely has not happened. It's still in the process of taking place.
Now, this thing seems like it should be a no-brainer. The states' rights in the U.S. has a very long history with the states determining their own destiny. I thought this thing would have been pushed through. Every state would have jumped up to say, we're going to dictate and manage our own. But that hasn't been the case. And especially with COVID, I thought it would be an impetus for job creation and for economic stimulus and, all the health benefits aside, like that's a no-brainer, but that hasn't happened. Which leads me to my next question, the wish list for Sahar, banking or legalization. I know what I would choose if I were you, but I'm not you. So what do you think?
That's a bit of a tough choice, but I think for me, I would choose legalization because it's a little bit of killing a couple birds really with one singular stone. So getting banking, for example, the SAFE Act passed, seeks to ameliorate a lot of the issues that we have with banking that stem from the fact that cannabis is still federally illegal. If we were to get legalization passed, much if not all of the concerns that we have with banking that we need to fix via legislation would kind of be fixed. And I think the addition to legalization in terms of banking would be that hopefully some of the stigma that we talked about earlier on would be removed or at least, lightened a little bit. So for me, it has to be legalization.
And again, another eloquent answer, because I would have just said, I'm an attorney and it would be law. So let's continue on our journey of Sahar and Barrington. Sahar, a few months after we've been speaking, asked if I would be available or would consider speaking on a panel discussion in Cartagena, Colombia. I reached out to the organizer, Julian Tobar, for Expo Cannabis. Shout out to Julian. Shout out to Julian. And Sahar and I met in person for the first time after months of talking. I actually was just so happy to meet her. I jumped out of the cab and ran, and it was the start, another start of of this wonderful journey. But while in Colombia, we had a little downtime, so we decided to take a street food tour
and eat everything in our path.
And eat everything that was fried or deep fried or double deep fried.
There was also juice involved. There was fruit and juice involved.
And it showed just how little I knew about the fruit that's available. I mean, I know apples, oranges, and pineapples, and kiwis, and things like that. But for whatever reason, I just thought that was it, that everything that's here is what's around the world. And that is so not the case, because Sahar and I had the pleasure of being introduced to this wonderful, wonderful fruit. Sahar, just what is it?
Lulo fruit.
Lulo fruit. For those of you who like happiness and sunshine combined into one liquid form, please consume Lulo and tell us where to get it, because we've looked everywhere.
We've even been able to find it anywhere.
The closest is like Lulo paste, which
is not quite the same, I don't think.
no,
Although I'm willing to try it.
I will try it. I definitely will try it. So that's where we met up, and of course we ran into each other again at Expo Cannabis. Or sorry, not
MJ
Expo Cannabis,
Biz.
MJ Biz.
MJ Biz.
Sorry, my head's still on lulo. So yeah, no, that was good. Let's for our next podcast, and I'm just going to throw it out there. Sahar touched upon it earlier, and that was social equity, and it is such a big part of this industry and the origins of the industry and the war on drugs. But Sahar, I was wondering if there's just a few words you want to sort of tease the audience with about what we're going to talk about in our next upcoming one.
So I'll try to summarize social equity, which trying to do that for such a huge and important aspect of the industry is difficult and might be futile, but alas, we'll try. So what social equity seeks to do is kind of right the wrongs almost of what has been a part of the cannabis industry. So as we know, the war on drugs unfairly impacted certain communities and certain ethnicities. And the concept of social equity is that now that we are able to profit legally from cannabis operations, those who were unfairly impacted by the war on drugs should be given an equitable playing field to be able to enter the industry in its current phase. They should have just as much access as others who weren't unfairly impacted by the war on drugs to be able to enter the cannabis industry as it is now. And that's taken shape in various different forms, whether it's one-to-one licensing, so you have to have one social equity applicant for every one non-social equity applicant who's licensed, whether it's reduced fees for social equity applicants, or it's allowing social equity applicants to access licenses sooner than those not.
It's you introduced me to a gentleman who used to be at the LA County, the district.
The DCR, the LA City, LA City's Department of Cannabis Regulations.
Yeah.
Adam Friedman, shout out to him.
Friedman, how's it going? And we actually had a podcast. If people would care to listen, it was under #finance, and you can check it out at CSE_TV, of course, on www.thecsc.com. It's available on our blog. As well, check out our Instagram, and we are on LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter, Facebook, and all of those other good things. So what's on the horizon for you? What is going on? Like, how during this time, how would you attract new customers? Or are you focusing on the ones that you have?
No, we're doing a little bit of both. One of the firm's really cornerstones has always been serving our clients to the best of our capabilities, irrespective of the size of the client or their needs, really. And right now has been a time for us to really double down on making sure that every client that we have gets the individualized attention that they need from us. So a lot of it has been communicating with clients about their changing needs at this time, how we can help them with that, how they can best reformulate or evolve their business to meet the demands of COVID and what might lie beyond that. And as far as getting new clients, we're very fortunate that we have cultivated a really good and solid reputation in the industry. So people kind of know VS as one of the firms in the country to turn to when they have any questions regarding cannabis related businesses, and also hemp. And so that's been something that's continued to bring in new clients. Obviously, the recognition that cannabis is an essential business has brought even more interest into the industry. So that's been a driver for new clients for us. But, we continue to make sure that we give clients everything they need, and we make them aware of all of the things that they should be thinking about and that they might need in the future. So really looking at their needs holistically and approaching it from today, tomorrow, next week, and onward into the future.
Well, I can attest to that, and I can vouch because we at the Canadian Securities Exchange have spoken to quite a number of people, and who have either spoken with you or your team, have retained your services, and all, and I mean all, have been batting thumbs up, batting 1,000, giving thumbs up. Clearly, baseball is not my thing. I'm suffering without sports because my references are all just jumbled. What are you doing during this quarantine? Are you reading? Are you writing? Are you painting? Are you watching Netflix? What are you doing to pass the time sometimes?
A little bit of everything. Luckily, I have been just as busy as ever, so I haven't really experienced as much of the quarantine boredom. Thank you to our clients for making that happen. But I've been filling a lot of my time with doing more and more reading and research on the industry, making sure that I'm up to date on everything that's changing, filling in any gaps of knowledge that there may have been before. Also doing a lot of writing. Our firm has been doing updates on COVID-19 on our website, and we continue to update those as states change. Doing more internal writing for the firm as well. Mm-hmm. So that's been fun. And a little bit of Netflix. I can't lie about that, but also doing some painting, doing some sculpting, getting creative again, which I think also helps me be a good attorney because cannabis industry requires a lot of creativity. So kind of go hand in hand.
So we've seen. We're approaching the top of the hour, and I just wanted to again express my gratitude, not only for the business relationship, but also the friendship of you and your colleagues from one coast to the other. It truly is a remarkable organization. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you or members of your firm, what would they do?
So you can go online onto our website, VicenteSederberg.com. If you want to get a hold of me specifically, my email is Sahar, Sahar, at VicenteSederberg.com. And I also want to take this opportunity to extend the gratitude to you and all of your colleagues at the CSE for just being, such a good part of the cannabis industry and being another big push in normalizing the cannabis industry. And continuing to support the industry. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm going to steal a line from Vlad at the Happy Monkey. Your vibe attracts your tribe. So we put it out there, and hopefully we get it back. And relationships such as the one we have with you are clear evidence of that. For those listening, you can find us on www.thecse.com. CSE_TV on YouTube, at Canadian Exchange.
Exchange, yeah.
We just changed our Instagram handle, different handle, same great taste, where you can find more episodes of Cannabis 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. We are changing the 420 to 520. What started as a week has now become a month. Don't forget to tune into West Coast Wednesdays with your hosts, Anil Mall and Anna Sarin. And we are also featuring some new segments, non-cannabis related, called Mining Mondays and Financial Fridays. And we might be doing Tech Tuesdays. So I think Thursdays are up for grabs. But I've been your host, Barrington Miller. I can be found at barrington.miller at thecsc.com, as well as on our website, www.thecsc.com. Don't forget to subscribe. I think that is all the plugging I can literally do. But again, thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time, and continue to support. Think locally, act locally, think globally, and wash your hands.
Yes.
Thank you, Sahar.
Thank you, Barrington.